if you are curious about the Rune Carver and ultimately how to create your legendaries, everything that it requires, that's what we're going to be going over. And specifically, the abilities that we're going to be talking about are for Druid. So, you get to the Rune Carver once you open up Torghast, and I went ahead and I have all the mats required to be able to craft all the legendaries here. You're going to need a couple of things before you can do any of this. You first of all need to learn the abilities for your class. And right now Blizzard has allowed a vendor for testing. So I'm going to go ahead and just click my Legendary Power book, and I'll be able to learn for all specs and classes. So we're good to go there. So now, if I go and I talk to the Rune Carver and I say, hey, I'd like to craft a legendary item, here they are. These are all the different legendary things I can do. These are all the different pieces of gear you can put it on. So you're going to need a couple of things to craft your legendary. These are my skills. This is the gear slot. And then these are for the scrolls, where you're going to be putting your primary stats that you want. So the things that you're going to need, as I mentioned, are your armor slot that you're going to be imbuing as a legendary. You're going to need these missives, which are like scrolls that have secondary stats. You can do 2 secondary stats. So you can do crit, you can do haste, you can do mastery, or you can do versatility. And I've got a bunch of these just so that I'm able to craft everything. And then each power is going to be limited to a certain armor slot. So these are all my Druid powers. As you can see, if I want to do Draught of the Deep Focus, which is when you Moonfire, Rake, Rip, or Rejuve are cast on a single target, their effects are increased by 30%. Well, it's limited to either your neck or your chest slot. So if I want to go ahead and create this, which, sure, let's go ahead and do that. So I know I need either a neck or a chest. So let me get back in here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put it on a neck. I'm going to be able to then pick Draught of Deep Focus. And then from there, I'm going to pick the stats that I want. And the stats that you want are ultimately likely going to be the class that you see yourself playing. They tried to make a good chunk of these. Well, most of them are supposed to be class specific, although there are some that are obviously better for certain specs. So for this one, when you Moonfire, Rake, Rip, or Rejuvenate on a single target, their effects are increased by 30%. That's pretty good throughput for just about every single one of the specs. I'm going to go ahead and just make one for Guardian. So we'll go with Mastery for now, and we'll go with Versatility. And then I'm going to go ahead and create. And this cutscene that you're about to see, hopefully is not what they end up going with. It seems a little lazy. There's really no sound with it whatsoever. And the other part of it is just, it doesn't feel like a tremendously epic moment. Maybe some of that has to do with the giant X through it, but as of right now, I think a little tweaking so that it's not the same thing every time would be great. So, okay, I went ahead and I crafted my legendary. Here it is. It's now Draught of the Deep Focus. I've got my neck, which is going to allow me to really essentially do everything other than what I need for Bear. So I wasn't really paying attention, but Moonfire, Rake, Rip, or Rejuve. I guess Moonfire is the one thing that would help me in Bear, but it's probably not the one that I'm going to start with. So I've got it. Here it is. It gives me a little extra throughput, helps my item level go up just a little bit. And as of right now, you can only have one at a time. So there's my neck piece. Let's talk about some of the other legendary skills here. The next one is going to be Circle of Life and Death. This is where your damage over time effects deal their damage in 25% less time. So you're actually going to be doing quite a bit more damage over 3/4 of the time that you were doing it before. Your healing over time effects, though, are only reduced by 15%. So overall, again, this is more of a throughput skill, but it works for both damage healing, and then to some extent you get a little extra tankiness, especially when it comes to Thrash and the dot that you get from that. So we'll go ahead. This one needs to go on a head or a finger, so we'll go ahead and craft it.
Do not lose yourself to despair.
Which they need to allow you to stay in there for it. Well, this is it's actually not showing up as a ring slot.
Fragments of memory.
Circle of life and death. It says head or finger. So let's go ahead and try that again.
Lie horrors beyond imagining.
Wrist. Here we go, finger. Okay, so circle of life and death. You may want to go with well, we'll go with haste, and we'll go with the mastery. And there you go. So this is basically the same thing. It's the same thing every time right now. So it'd be great if they swap that out. So there's my next legendary. Well, let's just talk through some of the other ones. We don't need to craft them all going forward. So this next one, Lycara's Fleeting Glimpse. Every 45 seconds while in combat, cast a spell based on your form. So this is a passive thing where every 45 seconds when you're in combat, you're going to get this. So it's either Wild Growth if you're just healing. It's Primal Wrath if you're in cat form. It's Barkskin if you're in bear form, and it's Starfall for Moonkin. And if you're in travel form, you actually get Stampeding Roar. So that's kind of cool that they give you that. So that's just more of a quality of life, nice little passive thing every 45 seconds when you're in combat. Next, we've got Oath of the Elder Druid. And for this one, the effects of Thick Hide, Astral Influence, Feline Swiftness, and Ysera's Gift are all increased by 75%. So when you shift into your affinity's form, you gain Heart of the Wild for 10 seconds, once every minute. We'll see how this one works out. The effectiveness increased by 75% is really phenomenal. But all that being said, I don't know that I don't know that unless you're going to be doing a lot of shifting, which there are instances in which you will, I'm not sure that this is going to be something that you take advantage of, because it is once every minute, and that's going to be something that's harder to track. Next, we've got this Luffa Infused Embrace, or Luffa. Thrash has 20% increased damage, 30% increased radius, and can stack one additional time. So this one's straight throughput, great for cat and bear. Overall, this one might make sense to prioritize if you're kind of hurting for that initial aggro. If you're bear form, that extra stack of Thrash is only going to help you. Also, it's really nice to have for cat too. Next one, we've got the Natural Order's Will, where Barkskin reduces the damage by an additional 15%. So you've got that, which you can couple with your Brambles, which is really nice. So when you have Brambles already going, you stack Barkskin. You're able to deal extra damage there too. So just having that available is actually really nice. And then on top of that, when that ends, when it ends when you're in bear form, you gain Iron Fur, which they just recently buffed, on top of a free Frenzied Regen. So this would be a great survivability option overall. And again, early content, maybe even dungeons, this is something that may make a lot of sense. Next up, our next power is Ursac's Lingering Spirit. So in bear form, Thrash has a 15% chance to trigger an additional Thrash. More of a throughput one, 15% chance is relatively low, but it's really nice to get those Thrash stacks up early, especially for Mythic Plus. Get those packs aggroed on top of you, especially since everything just about every skill now has a cap on the number of targets that it hits. So it's going to feel a little bit different than it does currently in live. Next up, we've got Legacy of the Sleeper. This is where when you berserk in bear form, you get an additional 25% damage, 15% leech, and immunity to effects that cause loss of control power in your character. So, it's not that's nice and everything, but I think the real thing that people are going to be chasing if they go after this one is really this next set of green text, which is its cooldown is reduced by 30 seconds. So the really nice thing, if you're thinking about bear tank right now, is that berserk is now baseline, and as a result, you no longer have to really worry too much about the Guardian of Ursak ability. It's something that is going to be more of a preference play style. But if you go with Galactic Guardian, you essentially have this ready to go on a 3-minute cooldown. So that's going to be something that is going to be more preference of play. But because we now have Berserk, it's going to feel as though we have the Vision of Perfection. Sorry, Essence blanked there. Already as kind of baseline. Only we're able to control it. So that's the thing that I think is really nice about having Berserk and then kind of pairing it with something like this. Is it going to be your first one? That's completely up to you. I think there's others for bears that might make more sense. But certainly it comes down to your playstyle. Next up, we've got Echo of Aeonar. This summons a spiritual familiar to your side. This is a weird one and is available for multiple classes. I haven't been able to test this too much, but ultimately what this does is your spells and abilities have a chance to send your familiar to a nearby ally, and if it does that, it increases their damage and healing by 10% for 15 seconds. If there are no allies present, or if you're soloing, your familiar will flock towards your nearest enemy, increasing your damage against them by 8% for 15 seconds. This one doesn't feel all that exciting to me, especially when it comes to buffing your own personal power. This is more of a group utility, and if I'm going Druid, I don't necessarily think that I'm going to be looking to buff my allies as much as I am myself, especially when you think about, as a cat, you want more of the throughput, which you do get, but it's only 8% for 15 seconds. Same with Moonkin. And then, if you're healing or tanking, you're gonna want it to buff you and your throughput, not necessarily an ally. More often than not, it's going to be 100% situational, but it doesn't seem like you have a lot of control over your familiar. So this one is just kind of lackluster in my opinion, and it's available for multiple classes. Next up, we've got Judgment of the Arbiter. Dealing damage has a high chance to release a blast of spiritual energy for 524 holy damage. If another ally who bears the judgment of the Arbiter is within 5 to 20 yards of you, the blast will also arc to them, dealing 524 holy damage to enemies within the arc. This one just feels like, in essence, and one that you're relying on others having the exact same legendary equipped. This one again is cross class, is not necessarily specific. So again, this one is just kind of in my opinion. Next up, we've got Organons Sagacity, if I'm saying that right. Where you cast a spell and it grants sagacity, stacking up to 10. When you move, you're able to cast while moving for 0.5 seconds for each stack. So in other words, you get 10 stacks, each 0.5. This means you can move for 5 seconds while casting. Not great for a druid, considering the fact that just about every single one of your casts you can do on the move already. But this is another one which is cross-class and could be beneficial for someone who's a little less mobile. Maybe, Holy Priest, Shaman, a couple of those that might need the little extra movement. But all that being said, you have to be very cognizant of what your stacks are. You have to know whether or not you've got the full 5 seconds. you can't necessarily rely on this always being available to you, especially because it is a passive thing. So just by casting a spell is when you start stacking it up. So it's something you're going to have to monitor. This might take a little too much management. It's not just something that you can click on cooldown where you can get the ability to move and cast simultaneously. So again, not real high on my personal list if I'm going to be healing, especially on a druid or really any other class for that matter. Okay, this one is a straight up. It's coming back from Legion. You may remember this. Suffuse's Proclamation, the ring that had dropped back in the day. This is where you reduce the effectiveness of crowd controlling effects by 10%, successfully applying a loss of crowd control to an enemy, interrupting an enemy, or dispelling any target will increase all of your secondary stats by 53 for 15 seconds. That's the part that is very useful. So it reduces any crowd control on you by 10%, but it also is a nice little throughput and buff to your secondary stats. Now, Blizzard has essentially capped the effectiveness of secondary stats going forward. They have said as much that they don't want it to get as out of control again, especially now that we're seeing everything going down with the whole corruption situation. So this one is going to require some testing, and it might be something that makes more sense to take if you are purposely keeping some secondary stats lower so that you can have this on demand. You can do it every 30 seconds, which is roughly the same time as most stunning cooldowns, right around there. So it just kind of depends too on class. If you've got, if you're a monk and you're able to sweep the leg every 30 seconds, this might make a little bit more sense to you than some other classes. Okay, we got a couple more. Next up, we've got Stable Phantasma Lure. Again, a cross-class legendary, one that's available for all, I believe. Increases Phantasma earned by 25%, which really means nothing because you don't necessarily know what that means right now. But looting Phantasma from enemies has a chance to summon a Phantasma demon, which will begin running in a random direction. If you kill that demon, it increases the Phantasma earned for the entire party by an additional 10% for 1 minute. Again, not necessarily sure what this is ultimately going to do, but it draws out Phantasma, gives you more to loot, and we'll see how that ends up being applied in the future. Third Eye of the Jailer is next up. We're killing a creature in the Maw, so this is a Maw-specific legendary. Increases your damage by 2%. If you kill a creature with the same name, you continue to stack that effect up to 5 times, so you can go up to 10%. Stacks are reset if you kill a creature with a different name. So again, this is Maw specific, and if you're planning on jumping into Mythic Plus or raiding as soon as possible, this is probably not going to be high on your priority list. Again, a cross-class one that might make sense for a quality of life thing down the road, but early on it may not make sense, especially if the Maw is released in the current state that it's in today. Vitality Sacrifice is up next. The first time you damage an elite enemy, you absorb the next 10,241 damage from that enemy and reflect it back to them. So, again, very niche-y. It comes down to damaging an elite enemy. It gives you a shield, effectively, for 10k damage, and then you're able to reflect that 10k damage back to them. You can only, however, have one shield active at a time, and this can only occur once every minute. So this might be more of a solo legendary, something that helps with more quality of life stuff, but may or may not find its place in some competitive content. We'll have to see. And then lastly, we've got Maw Rattle, where killing an enemy, and this is another goofy, cross-class legendary that everyone has access to, but you kill an enemy and it has a high chance to spawn an explosive Maw Rat at the corpse's location. After 6 seconds, the Maw Rat will explode, dealing 314 nature damage to all nearby enemies. This is going to poison them and decrease their damage done by 5% for 10 seconds. This one is going to need some testing. It's interesting. It sounds fun. It sounds goofy. Not sure how many people are going to target this one first, but it's worth touching on because it is a cross-class legendary. So, really, if you look at the Druid specific abilities, there's a number of these, and they're not necessarily all that exciting. For the most part, they really all kind of come down to throughput, specifically the Draught of Deep Focus, which is one that we crafted, as well as Circle of Life and Death, which is going to increase throughput as well. There's some Thrash-specific ones, actually two. You got Ursoc's Lingering Spirit, and you've got the Luffa-infused Embrace. So those are going to be a little nichey. And then the Legacy of the Sleeper for Guardians looks like it has potential, but we'll ultimately have to see, how that starts to sim, toward in the more competitive scene overall. My thoughts are, and I come from a tank experience. That's kind of primarily where I like to play. My thought is that all of these providing throughput are a good thing. One of the things that I think tanks are in for a little bit of a rude awakening is that throughput is not nearly close to what it is, especially current state and live with corruptions. We don't have anything like that. We don't have crazy secondary stat scaling. So it's not the worst thing in the world to target something that helps with throughput. But the other area that we're all going to have to adjust to when Shadowlands goes live is that our mitigation is not where it currently is today either. And we're still seeing Blizzard make these tweaks overall. The buff to Iron Fur in the last week was a really, really good thing for Bears overall, but we have no idea where this is going to go. So we'll just have to hang tight and see. These are still, Legendaries for the most part have petered out. They're not necessarily tweaking them too much. There's not a lot of overhauling that's going on. It's going to be more focused to the Covenants and to the actual class and spec abilities going forward. So hopefully we'll get an answer, and you guys will have a better idea of which one you want to target first. Personally, if I'm looking at this right now, if I'm running Mythic Plus as a bear, the Natural Orders will makes a lot of sense. But so do some of the others. So I think you can make an argument for just about any one of these without having anything go terribly, terribly wrong. It's really going to come down to playstyle, and that's pretty cool to be able to have that decision made. But again, keep in mind you can only equip one of these currently, and I'm going to run some testing. I might do some crafting here, and I'll run some tests and figure out which ones make the most sense, even in low level dungeons, just to kind of see how they feel to play. Again, a lot of these are passive, so I don't know that it's going to alter really your playstyle at all, and you may not even really notice when a legendary procs, in all honesty, but all we can do is test it out. So anyway, appreciate you guys tuning in. Hopefully this was somewhat helpful.